The bullet hit him from behind. Kang Si-woo didn't scream. Men like him didn't scream. They calculated even as the ground rushed up to meet them, even as the hot copper taste of blood flooded the back of his throat, even as his knees buckled on the cracked red earth, and the desert heat pressed down on him like the hand of something ancient and pitiless. He had been standing at the edge of the extraction point, waiting for the helicopter that his second-in-command, Park Hyun, had arranged. 12 years. 12 years of loyalty. 12 years of pulling Park Hyun out of every burning building, every failed deal, every dangerous room. And this was the return. A single shot. Clean. Professional. Deliberate. Si-woo turned as he fell. Just enough to see Park Hyun lower the gun with the practiced calm of a man who had rehearsed this moment many times. The helicopter that landed behind him carried men Si-woo didn't recognize. New soldiers, new faces, the architecture of a coup that had been quietly assembled while Si-woo built the empire that made it possible. "You were always too sentimental," Park Hyun said, straightening his jacket. "That was your weakness." Si-woo pressed a hand to his side. The wound was bad. Not immediately fatal, but bad. He could feel the mathematics of his own death calculating themselves somewhere deep in his chest. Without help, without water, under a Namibian sun that had no mercy for anyone, he had perhaps 6 hours. Park Hyun didn't look at him again. He simply boarded the helicopter and it rose, carrying with it 12 years of stolen loyalty, stolen wealth, and a stolen empire. The sound faded. The desert swallowed everything. Si-woo lay on his back, staring up at a sky that was an obscene, beautiful blue. The kind of sky that had no business existing above a dying man. He pressed harder on the wound. He would not die confused. He would die knowing exactly what had happened and exactly who had done it. That would have to be enough. For now, Adaise Okafor was not supposed to be on that road. The main route from Walvis Bay had been closed due to a police blockade, something about a smuggling raid 3 kilometers east, and the detour had taken her 40 minutes off schedule onto a gravel trail that barely qualified as a road. She was hauling medical supplies for a clinic in a remote settlement 200 kilometers north, and every minute of delay was a minute to the cold chain on those vaccines was ticking closer to useless. She had no time for detours. She had no time for anything except the road, the truck, and the delivery. That was when she saw the shape in the dust. At first, she thought it was an animal, something large that had collapsed and died in the heat. She slowed out of instinct. Debris on the road was how you blew a tire and spent the night stranded. But as her truck rolled closer, the shape resolved into something unmistakably human. A man, flat on his back, one arm stretched out, the other pressed against his side. Ada stopped the truck. She sat behind the wheel for 3 full seconds. She was a Nigerian woman alone on a desert road in a foreign country with 200,000 rand worth of medical supplies in the back of her truck. Every practical instinct she had told her to call it in to someone else, to keep driving, to not stop for a man she didn't know in a place where no one would hear her if things went wrong. She opened the truck door and climbed out, because Ada had never, in her 31 years on this earth, been fully governed by practical instinct. She crouched beside him. Korean, mid-30s, expensive clothes, destroyed by blood and dust, gunshot wound to the left side, still breathing shallow and labored, but breathing. His jaw was set even in semi-consciousness, like even now his body was refusing to give the desert the satisfaction of seeing him break. "Hey," she pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Strong pulse, stubborn pulse. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, dark, sharp, disoriented for less than a second before they locked onto her face with an intensity that would have frightened a different woman. "Don't," his voice cracked. "Don't call anyone." Ada stared at him. "You have a bullet in your side. I know. You need a hospital." "No." The word came out flat and final, a door slamming shut. "No hospital. No police. If you're going to help me, those are the terms." Ada looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked around at the empty desert, the empty sky, the empty road in both directions. "You're in absolutely no position to be giving terms," she said. She got him into the truck. It was not elegant. Siwoo was 6'1" of dead weight and wounded pride, and Ada was 5'6" of stubbornness and medical supply lifting experience. She maneuvered him against the passenger door, one arm braced across her shoulders, and he did not make a sound even when she bumped the wound, getting him up the step. She noticed that, the control it took, the specific kind of discipline that only lived in people who had spent years training themselves not to react to pain. She noticed other things too, the quality of what remained of his shirt, the kind of watch face cracked, but Swiss that didn't belong on anyone who had accidentally wandered into a desert. The way his eyes, even half glazed with blood loss, kept moving, cataloging, assessing. The eyes of a man who had spent his life reading rooms. She pulled her supply kit from behind the driver's seat. "What is your name?" she asked, cutting away the ruined shirt. A pause. "Siwoo. Is that all you're giving me?" "For now." Ada pulled on her gloves. The wound was through and through. The bullet had exited cleanly, which was both the best and worst news. Best, because she didn't need to dig for it. Worst, because through and throughs bled freely. She packed it with her trauma gauze and pressed. Siwoo's breath hissed through his teeth. "That's going to hurt for a while," she said without sympathy. "I've had worse. I believe you." She began to rap. Her hands were efficient, practiced. She had done aid work in 3 countries, and a field dressing was not new territory. "I'm Ada. Since you seem to think introductions only go one way." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not softness exactly, but a kind of recalibration, like he had categorized her one way and was now filing her somewhere else. "Ada," he repeated. "Don't wear it out." She tied off the dressing and pulled off her gloves. "I have vaccines in the back of this truck that need to reach a clinic by tonight. You're coming with me, because leaving you here is not something I'm capable of doing. But when we reach the settlement, we're reassessing. Reassessing. Yes, whether you live or die is your business. Whether I get these supplies to children who need them is mine." She met his eyes directly. "Are we clear?" Siwoo looked at her for a moment, with an expression she couldn't quite name. In 12 years at the head of an empire built on fear, no one had spoken to him like that. No one had cataloged his survival as a secondary priority to a vaccine cold chain. It was, he realized distantly, the most honest thing anyone had said to him in a very long time. "Clear," he said. Ada started the truck. The settlement was called Omukutu, 40 families, a clinic run by a South African doctor named Elsa who asked no questions when Ada arrived with a wounded stranger and unloaded supplies simultaneously. Elsa cleaned the wound properly, administered antibiotics from her own stock, and told Siwoo in precise clinical terms that he had approximately 48 hours of mandatory rest before his body would permit any serious movement without risk of reopening the injury. Siwoo told her he understood. He did not look like a man who intended to understand. Ada watched him from across the small room that Elsa had cleared as a recovery space. A cot, a window, a rickety wooden chair she had pulled up beside it. Siwoo lay on the cot with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling with the focused expression of someone running very fast in a direction no one else could see. "You're thinking about whoever shot you," Ada said. His eyes moved to her. "You're observant. I'm a woman who drives alone across 3 countries for a living. Observant is how I stay alive." A silence settled. Outside, children were laughing at something near the water pump. The sound came through the window, warm and uncomplicated, and it seemed to land differently on Siwoo. She saw something flicker across his face. Not pain. Something older than pain. "You should go," he said. "You've done more than enough." "I will. When I know you're not going to pull that dressing off and crawl into the desert to do something stupid." His mouth moved, almost a smile. "You think you could stop me?" "I think I could embarrass you in front of these children, which for a man like you is probably worse." Ada leaned back in the chair. "What kind of man are you, Siwoo? What kind of man gets shot in the middle of the Namib and tells a stranger not to call anyone? The kind with enemies. That doesn't narrow it down." He looked at her for a long moment. There was a calculation happening behind those dark eyes. She could feel it. The way you feel someone measuring the weight of a door before they decide whether to open it. "The kind," he said finally, "whose enemies are now also looking for him." Ada held his gaze. "Are they going to come here?" "Not yet. They believe I'm dead." "And when they find out you're not?" Siwoo's jaw tightened. "Then it will be complicated." Ada stood slowly, looked out the window at the children, then back at him. "I'll stay 1 more night," she said. "And then you're going to tell me exactly how complicated, so I can decide whether to keep being generous." She walked out before he could respond. Siwoo stared at the empty doorway for a moment. Then something crossed his face that 12 years of power had almost trained out of him completely. Respect. He had built the organization from nothing. That was the part that lived like a splinter in Siwoo's chest as he lay awake that night, listening to the desert settle into silence. Not the betrayal itself. He had always known betrayal was the tax on power, the inevitable cost of building something large enough to attract hungry men. What burned was the origin, the foundation. Park Hyun had been with him from the beginning. From the 2-room apartment in Busan, where a 22-year-old Kang Si-woo had made his first deal on a handshake and a reputation that didn't exist yet. Park Hyun had been the one who watched the door that night, the one who counted the money, the one who, when Si-woo was jumped by 3 men from a rival crew and came home bleeding from his eye socket, sat on the floor with him and said, "Tell me who, I'll handle it." 12 years. Every city, every expansion, every war, every decision that cost something and every victory that cost more. Si-woo had elevated Park Hyung above every other lieutenant, above men who were older, harder, more feared. He had done it because he believed Park Hyun was the one person in the organization whose ambition was matched only by his loyalty. He had been wrong. He turned the betrayal over in his mind now the way you turn a stone to find what lives underneath it. The signs had been there. He could see them now with the horrible clarity of hindsight. The questions Park Hyung had been asking in the last 6 months about the offshore accounts. The way he had begun cultivating relationships with the Japanese consortium that Si-woo had been negotiating against. The trip to Seoul that he had explained as personal business and that Si-woo had not questioned because 12 years had made him stop questioning Park Hyun. That was the cost of trust. You stopped auditing the people you trusted. You stopped reading the room because familiarity made you believe you already knew what was in it. The helicopter, the new faces, the practiced calm. This had been planned for months. Si-woo closed his eyes, not to sleep, to think, He had a number memorized, one number, burned into his memory precisely for a moment like this. One man inside the organization who owed him a debt that predated Park Hyun's influence. One contact who could be reached without triggering the network Park Hyun now controlled. He needed a phone. He needed 48 hours. He needed to not be dead. Outside the window, the desert was quiet and enormous and indifferent. Inside his chest, something cold and very old had reawakened. Not anger. Anger was amateur. What had woken up was something far more patient, far more precise, and far more dangerous. Kang Si-woo began to plan. Ada brought him food in the morning: rice, boiled eggs, and a thermos of tea that smelled like ginger, and something she said was called zobo. He ate everything. She noticed that too. Most wounded men had no appetite. He ate like someone refueling a machine that needed to run. "You need a phone," she said. He looked up. "You've been staring at my jacket pocket since I walked in," Ada said. "You want my phone." A pause. Then, "Yes." She pulled it out and held it. "I want to know one thing first. Ask, is the person you're calling going to put me in danger?" Si-woo was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of evasion, the silence of a man being genuinely careful with an answer. "Not directly," he said. "The call will be traced eventually. But by the time it is, I'll be gone from here. And me? You'll be a truck driver who picked up a stranger. There's nothing that connects you to me beyond a good deed." Ada studied him. "You'd better be right about that." She handed him the phone. He dialed from memory, and the call connected on the second ring. He spoke in Korean, rapid, low, a sequence of coded phrases that she didn't understand, but that clearly carried enormous freight, because even from across the room, she could feel the weight of what was being exchanged. When he ended the call, his face had changed. The patient blankness was still there, but underneath it, something had sharpened to a fine point. "Thank you," he said, and handed the phone back. Ada pulled her chair close. "Are you going to tell me what you are? I'm not asking for the whole story. I'm asking for enough to know what I walked into." Si-woo looked at her. This was the moment she could feel it. The door either opened or it didn't. "I run an organization," he said carefully. "What kind?" "The kind that governments prefer not to acknowledge." Ada was quiet for a moment. "Criminal, among other definitions." She exhaled slowly through her nose. She should have been afraid. She could see him watching for it, the flinch, the withdrawal, the sudden reassessment. It wasn't that she didn't feel a version of it. It was that she had grown up in Lagos, had driven alone through conflict zones, had looked real danger in his actual face enough times to know the difference between what fear was warning her about and what it was simply reacting to. Si-woo was dangerous. That was real. But right now, lying on a cot with a bandaged wound and cautious eyes, he was also just a man. "Eat the rest of your eggs," Ada said. He blinked. "You're going to need the protein," she said. "Whatever comes next, you need to be stronger than you are right now." Park Hyun found out on the third day. Si-woo had known it would come, known it the moment he made the call, known it the way a chess player knows 3 moves ahead that a sacrifice will eventually cost something. The man he had called was loyal but not invisible, and Park Hyun had placed watchers on every old loyalty Si-woo had ever cultivated. What he hadn't expected was how fast. He was outside, standing at the edge of the settlement in the thin morning light, testing the wound, checking whether 48 hours of Elsa's antibiotics had bought him enough mobility to matter when Ada came out behind him, her phone in her hand, her expression different from anything he had seen on her face before. "Someone just drove past the road 3 times, she said. "Elsa's nephew has a pasture out that way," he called her. Siwoo turned. "A black Land Cruiser," Ada said. "No plates." The math ran fast. Park Hyun had cross-referenced the phone signal, triangulated to the region, and sent a scout. The scout was not here to confirm death. The scout was here to confirm location, which meant within 12 hours, Park Hyun would know Siwoo was alive and would send something considerably more serious than a Land Cruiser. Siwoo looked at Ada. "How quickly can you move?" "Move where?" "Away from here." He was already scanning the settlement, the children, the clinic, the 40 families that had done nothing except exist in the wrong proximity to his war. "These people cannot be here when those men come back." Ada stared at him. "You're worried about the settlement." "Don't look surprised." "I'm not." She stopped. "I am, a little." She shook herself. "I have 3 vehicles I can drive. Elsa has a truck. Between us, we can get everyone to the secondary camp, 40 kilometers northeast. It's off any road on any map." "How long?" 2 hours if everyone cooperates. They need to cooperate fast. Siwoo looked toward the horizon. Nothing visible yet, but the desert revealed arrivals early, if you watch the dust. "I'll help load." And Ada, she looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for bringing this here." Ada held his gaze for a moment. There was something in his eyes she had not expected to find. Not guilt, exactly, which could be performed, but something raw, accountability. The specific kind that lives in people who are not accustomed to saying the words and say them anyway because the words are true. "Move fast," she said. "Apologize later." They moved to the settlement in 97 minutes. Siwoo worked alongside the men and women of Omukutu, without instruction, without ego, carrying loads and helping elderly residents into the vehicles with a focused efficiency that drew looks from people who hadn't expected a wounded stranger to function as part of a community. He did not explain himself. He simply worked. Ada watched him between her own tasks and felt something she did not have time to name properly. Elsa was the last one in. She clasped Ada's hand at the door of her truck. "The man?" she said quietly. "He carries something heavy." "Yes," Ada said. "Be careful." "Always." Elsa drove northeast. The settlement emptied. The dust settled. Ada and Siwoo stood at the edge of what had been Omukutu, now just empty structures. A silent water pump. A clinic with its medicines packed and its cot folded. The desert stretched around them with its ancient, impassive patience. "My contact is sending a car," Siwoo said. "It will reach this coordinate in 6 hours." 6 hours, Ada repeated. She looked at her truck, then at him. "Then we wait." They went back inside the clinic. Ada made tea. Siwoo sat at the window with the clarity of a man who had made peace with waiting by learning to use it. His eyes tracking the horizon, his mind clearly running the machinery of whatever plan had been assembling itself since the first night. "Tell me about the man who shot you," Ada said. Siwoo's jaw tightened. "You don't have to," Ada added. "But you've been carrying it alone since I found you. And carrying things alone is heavy work." He was silent for a long moment. The wind moved through the empty settlement. The water pump creaked. "His name is Park Hyun," Siwoo said. He was a pause, a precise, deliberate edit. He was the person I trusted most. Ada was quiet. "We built something together," Siwoo continued. His voice was even, but she could hear what it was costing to keep it that way. "I thought what we had was rare." I thought it was the kind of loyalty that didn't have a price. I was wrong. Everything has a price. I just never thought to find out what his was. Ada turned her cup in her hands. What will you do when you find him? What I should have done to anyone who raised a hand to me. Ada looked up. And after that? What does your life look like after that? Siwoo blinked. Like the question had caught him somewhere undefended. Like the concept of after was a country he hadn't considered buying a map for. I don't know, he said quietly. And Ada thought, watching his face in that moment, that's the most honest thing you've said yet. The 6 hours passed like a slow tide. They talked. Not continuously. Siwoo was not a man built for continuous talking, and Ada respected silence too much to fill it with noise. But in the spaces between watching the horizon and drinking tea and listening to the desert shift and settle, things were said that neither of them had planned to say. Ada told him about Lagos, about her father, who had driven trucks for 20 years and had taken her on routes since she was 7, standing on the passenger seat with her chin on the dashboard, watching the road unspool ahead of them like a promise. He said the road teaches you more about people than any city does, she said. He said on the road, everything strips away. No performance, no costume, just the person and what they do when things get hard. Siwoo listened to this with his full attention, the kind of full attention that had probably once made him excellent at reading his enemies, and was now being turned on something altogether different. Your father was wise, he said. He was. She smiled, and it was a complicated smile, the kind that held grief and love in equal proportion. He died 4 years ago. Heart. On the road, naturally, which would have been exactly what he wanted. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a good death. He was doing what he loved, going somewhere that mattered. She looked at Siwoo sideways. What about you? Family? A silence with edges. My mother, he said. In Busan. She thinks I run an import business. Ada bit the inside of her lip to keep from smiling. Does she? She is uncomplicated in her trust of me. It is the one relationship I have never been able to poison. And your father? Gone. When I was 9. No elaboration. But the weight of those 5 words was enormous, and Ada heard all of it. So you built an empire, she said, not as accusation, but as understanding, to replace the thing that was taken. Siwoo looked at her sharply. The look of someone who has had a truth named without warning. You should have been a detective, he said. I'm a truck driver, Ada said, which means I listen for a living. She met his eyes. What happened to you was not just betrayal by a colleague, Siwoo. It was betrayal by the only family you chose for yourself. That's different. That's deeper. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not tears. Nothing so available as that, but something adjacent. The kind of shift that happens in a person when they have been seen accurately for the first time in a very long time. Before either of them could find words for what had settled between them, headlights appeared on the horizon. Siwoo was on his feet before they resolved into a shape, one vehicle, moving steadily, the right direction. His contact's car. If this story is hitting different already, if you felt that, drop a comment below and tell me what's got you most gripped. And if you haven't subscribed to Shadow Oath yet, do it now. New stories every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. The man who stepped out of the car was named Cho Dal-soo, 50s, gray at the temples. The careful, unhurried bearing of someone who had survived long enough in dangerous proximity to power to have made a science of invisibility. He handed Siwoo a bag. Siwoo opened it without expression. A clean phone, a field medical kit, a weapon, cash, and a dossier printed on 4 folded pages. "The situation in Seoul," Cho said in Korean. "Tell me." Cho spoke quietly for 5 minutes. Ada stood at a distance, not pretending she couldn't see the weight of what was being transferred. When Cho finished, Si-woo was quiet for a moment, then turned to her. "Park Hyun has called an assembly of the full council," he said. "In 4 days, he's going to formally consolidate control. If that happens," he stopped. "It becomes permanent," Ada finished. "Yes." Cho looked at Ada with undisguised assessment. The kind of look that runs a calculation you're not invited to participate in. "Who is she?" "She saved my life," Si-woo said flatly. The flatness itself was a warning. Cho's assessment softened immediately. "The phone signal was traced," Cho said, switching to English for Ada's benefit with the deliberate courtesy of someone who had decided she mattered. "They know you're alive. Park Hyun has sent a 6-man unit. We estimate they'll reach this area by dawn." Dawn was 6 hours away. Ada looked at the empty settlement around them, at the sky, going deep purple and orange at its edges, at Si-woo, who was already folding the dossier and reassembling the calculation behind his eyes. 6 men, she said. "Yes," Cho confirmed. "And you have?" 4, waiting 10 kilometers north. Cho looked at Si-woo. "Not enough for a direct engagement, but enough for mobility." Si-woo's jaw was set. Ada knew that jaw now knew what it meant when it went like that, the particular angle of contained fury. "Then we don't engage directly," Si-woo said. "We move, and we draw them somewhere the geometry works in our favor." He looked at Ada. "Do you know this terrain?" "Better than anyone in a land cruiser does," Ada said. "Then I need your help one more time." His voice was even, but underneath it was something careful and deliberate. Not a command, an ask, from a man who did not ask easily. "Not because you owe me anything, you owe me nothing, but because you need someone who knows the road," Ada finished. She looked at the darkening sky. She thought about her father, about what he had said in the cab of a truck when she was 7 years old, and the road unspooled ahead of them like a promise. "The ones who stop for people, those are the ones who matter, Ada. Anyone can drive past." "Tell me where we need to be by morning," she said. She drove through the desert dark with no headlights for the last 20 kilometers. Ada had done it before, not often, and not for reasons like this. But the Namibian desert at night had a particular quality of visibility when your eyes adjusted, when the stars were thick enough to read by and the land was flat enough to read ahead. She drove by, memory and the starlight, and the subtle texture of the earth under the tires. And Si-woo sat in the passenger seat, without a word of doubt or instruction, which was its own thing, a man who trusted competence when he saw it. They reached the ravine system 20 minutes before Cho's 4 men arrived from the north. The terrain was Si-woo's idea and Ada's knowledge combined. A series of narrow channels carved by seasonal flooding, visible from above as shadow on shadow, navigable on foot, but a nightmare for vehicles. Park Hyun's men would have to abandon the land cruisers and come in on foot, which reduced the numbers advantage and eliminated the mobility advantage simultaneously. Si-woo explained the arrangement to Cho in Korean. Cho nodded and went to position his men. "You stay with the truck," Si-woo told Ada. She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "Not because you can't handle yourself, because if something happens to me, I need someone to drive these men out. You're the contingency." Ada searched his face. And if something happens to you, a beat, something crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite the absence of one. Then you are never here. You're a truck driver who dropped a passenger at a junction and drove north. That's all anyone will ever be able to prove. Sivu, Ada, he said her name with a directness that stopped her. Not the directness of command, which she had heard from him and didn't respond to. Something different. Something careful. Thank you for everything from the beginning. Whatever happens in the next 2 hours, you should know that. She stared at him. Then she reached into the bag on the back seat and handed him a bottle of water. Drink this before you go, she said. You're still healing, and you're going to need your blood pressure. He took the water. That almost smile again. Also, she added, don't die. It would be extremely inconvenient for me after everything I've put in. He looked at her one moment longer than was strictly practical. Then he turned and moved into the dark ravine, and the desert folded him in. Ada gripped the steering wheel with both hands and did not allow herself to feel anything until she had to. The 6 men came exactly when Cho had predicted. Siwoo heard them before he saw them, the specific auditory signature of trained men moving at pace in unfamiliar terrain. They were good. Park Hyun always hired good. But good was relative, and this terrain rewarded intimate knowledge over training every time. 2 of Cho's men peeled the unit's flanks in the first 3 minutes, splitting 6 into 3 manageable pairs before any of them had a chance to consolidate. Siwoo moved through the ravine channels with the focused economy of someone who had spent years learning how to exist invisibly in hostile space. The wound pulled sharp, insistent, demanding to be acknowledged, and he refused the acknowledgement. Later. There would be time for pain later. He found the unit leader near the North Channel. The man was good, experienced. He had doubled back on his own trail, which meant someone had trained him to expect pursuit. He almost had Siwoo on the second turn. Almost. But Siwoo had 12 years of survival instinct and something new running underneath it, a particular kind of fire that had been restoked at the edge of death and fed with every day since then. The fire of a man who had remembered, for the first time in longer than he could calculate, that he had something worth surviving for. The confrontation was brief, clinical. The unit leader was disarmed and restrained before the exchange lasted 2 minutes. Tell Park Hyun, Siwoo said quietly, crouching to the man's eye level, that I'm not dead. Tell him to expect me, and tell him. He paused. Tell him I'm bringing the accounts. He stood and walked away. The accounts, 12 years of the organization's financial architecture, held in encrypted files that Siwoo had been the sole administrator of the only set of records that documented every payment, every contract, every arrangement that Park Hyun had agreed to and signed his name to before he had ever thought about a coup. Records that, in the wrong hands specifically, in the hands of the 5 governments who would pay generously for them, would reduce everything Park Hyun had built to rubble. This was not a war Siwoo intended to win with violence. Violence was how you won battles. Leverage was how you won wars. He emerged from the ravine as the first gray light was beginning at the horizon's edge. Cho was already there. All 4 of his men accounted for, 2 minor injuries. The unit is contained, Cho said. Yes. Siwoo looked north. We need to be in Windhoek by tonight. We'll move from there. And the woman? Siwoo turned toward where Ada's truck was parked at the ravine's edge, her silhouette visible through the windshield upright, awake, watching. She goes her own way, he said. With protection until I confirm it's safe, non-negotiable. Cho nodded. The meeting with Park Hyun happened in Seoul, 11 days later. Siwoo had chosen the location personally, a restaurant in Itaewon that Park Hyun had always loved, which Siwoo had always found too loud. He had chosen it now because it was public, because Park Hyun would feel safe in it, and because Siwoo had learned long ago that the feeling of safety was the most useful thing you could give an enemy before you took everything else from them. Park Hyun arrived with 4 men. He stopped when he saw Siwoo seated at the corner table. Something moved across his face fast, involuntary, the ghost of real fear before discipline closed over it. Then he smiled. The practiced, professional smile of a man performing confidence. "So you're alive," Park Hyun said, sitting down. "Disappointing for you," Siwoo agreed. The 4 men positioned themselves at points in the room. Siwoo didn't look at them. He poured tea from the pot on the table and pushed a cup across. "You've caused some disruption," Park Hyun said. The council knows," Siwoo said simply. Park Hyun's smile didn't change, but something behind it did. "Knows what?" Siwoo opened the folder on the table. Page 1, the financial records. Page 2, the Japanese consortium correspondence. Page 3. The communication logs from the 6 months before the desert meticulously extracted by Cho from a server Park Hyun had believed was encrypted beyond reach. Park Hyun looked at the pages. His jaw tightened. "You have 2 choices," Siwoo said. "The first is that you resign your position, transfer the consolidated accounts to the trustees I've named, and disappear. New country, new name. You get your life. That is the full generosity of the first option. And the second," Siwoo folded his hands on the table. "The second is that these records go to the people who have been paying me for years to keep them private. Every government, every consortium, every prosecutor who has been building a case. The second option ends with you in a cell you never leave, and not one of ours." Silence. Park Hyun stared at him across the table. The performance of confidence had completely dissolved now, and what remained was bare and unlovely, a man who had miscalculated the depth of the thing he had tried to take, looking directly at the cost. "You'd burn it all down," Park Hyun said. "The whole organization, everything we built." "I didn't build it to need it forever," Siwoo said quietly. "You were the one who thought it was worth dying over." Park Hyun looked at the folder, looked at Siwoo. "Give me a week," he said. "You have 3 days." Siwoo stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the restaurant into the bright Seoul afternoon. The 4 men didn't follow him. They understood, as men in that world always understood eventually, when the ground under a power had finally shifted beyond recovery. Outside, he stood for a moment on the pavement, letting the city move around him. He had won. He had done what he came to do. He had the empire back every account, every position, every seat on every council that Park Hyun had tried to occupy in his absence. He stood there, and he thought about a woman in a truck, driving through desert dark without headlights, governed entirely by memory and starlight. He took out his phone. Ada was in Lusaka when the call came. She was sitting in the cab of her truck outside a fuel station, writing up her delivery logs, the afternoon heat pressing flat against the windshield, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize but somehow knew. She picked up. "You made it," she said. "I made it." His voice was the same, even, contained, with that specific quality of precision. But there was something different underneath it, something lighter. Like a man who had put down a weight he had been carrying so long he had forgotten he was carrying it. "Are you well?" "I'm fine. Are you?" "The wound is healing." A pause. "Ada, I handled what needed to be handled. I know you would. She looked out at the road. What happens now for you? A silence that felt considered, genuine. The silence of someone deciding what true looked like and choosing it. I'm stepping back, Siwoo said. From the organization. There are people I trust, genuinely trust, now that I know what the word costs to carry what needs to be carried. And he paused again. I'm deciding what after looks like. Ada felt something move in her chest. You remember that question? I've been thinking about it since you asked it. His voice was quiet. I thought perhaps if the person who asked it was passing through a city that had good food and better company, she might be willing to continue the conversation in person. Ada looked at the fuel station, the road beyond it, the particular way a road looks when it's taking you somewhere new. I drive to Nairobi in 2 weeks, she said. I'll pass through Addis on the way. I can be in Addis. Ada smiled. And it was not the complicated smile she wore for grief and love combined. It was a simpler one, clear, uncomplicated. The smile her father had worn when a long road finally went somewhere worth going. Don't be late, she said. I've survived worse than a flight to Addis. That's not reassuring. She was laughing now, lightly, the kind of laugh that catches a person off guard because it isn't performed. I'll see you in 2 weeks, Siwoo. 2 weeks. She ended the call and sat for a long moment in the quiet of the cab. Outside, the road stretched ahead, unhurried and patient, the way roads that go somewhere good always do. She thought about what her father had said, about people who stop, about what it means to be the kind of person who, when everyone else drives past, puts the truck in park and gets out. She thought about how a man who had been left for dead in a desert had looked at her across a borrowed cot in an empty clinic and said, "Thank you," like it was a word he had to learn how to mean again. She thought, I did not plan any of this, and somehow it is the most alive I have felt in years. Then she closed her logbook, started the truck, and drove. That is the story of Kang Siwoo and Adaeze Okafor, the man who lost everything and the woman who taught him that after is not an absence, it's a beginning. If this story moved you, if you felt the desert heat, the silence in that clinic, the weight of 12 years of misplaced trust, then you are exactly who Shadow Oath was made for. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me your favorite moment, and if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Afro-Korean drama drops new stories every week. Turn on notifications. We have so much more coming. And to the ones who always stop for people on the road, this story was for you. See you in the next one.